Why do some intelligent people feel constantly exhausted, even when they do nothing physical? Why does their mind never turn off and their sensitivity seem more intense than that of others? Is it a blessing or a silent burden? Behind this way of thinking and feeling, there are deep psychological patterns that almost no one explains. Stay until the end, because understanding them can completely change the way you see yourself. For many people with high intelligence, the real problem is not outside, but inside their own mind. Their brain rarely turns off. It thinks, analyzes, connects ideas without rest. Even in moments of calm, the mind keeps working, reviewing past conversations, imagining future scenarios, questioning decisions that can no longer be changed. This constant flow of thoughts is not always productive. It often becomes a trap. Every situation is examined from all possible angles. Every error, no matter how small, is amplified. Every silence is interpreted. Thus, overanalysis is born, a form of mental exhaustion that does not allow for rest even when the body is still. While other people manage to disconnect with ease, the most intelligent minds tend to get caught in internal loops. They wonder what they could have said better, what consequences a minimal decision will have, or what someone else's reaction really means. The brain looks for patterns, causes, and explanations even where there are none. Over time, this process generates a constant feeling of tiredness. It is not a lack of physical energy, but mental fatigue. The mind never rests enough to feel light. Sleeping does not always help, because thoughts continue even at night, transforming into silent worries. Paradoxically, this ability to think deeply, which is usually associated with success and creativity, can become an emotional burden. Thinking too much does not necessarily lead to acting better. In many cases, it paralyzes. The person doubts, delays decisions, fears being wrong, because they see too many variables at the same time. Thus, the brain that never turns off transforms into an invisible prison. From the outside, no one notices. From the inside, it is a constant struggle to find silence, clarity, and rest in a world that never stops spinning. In addition to thinking too much, these people usually feel too much. Their emotional sensitivity is deep, though rarely visible. They perceive minimal changes in tone of voice, subtle gestures, silences that others ignore. What for many goes unnoticed, for them becomes emotional information. This sensitivity does not mean fragility, but an intense capacity for empathy. They understand the emotional state of others without anyone having to explain it. They feel the tension in a room, detect the discomfort in a conversation, and catch the sadness hidden behind a smile. However, this ability has a price. They absorb others' emotions as if they were their own. Others' bad moods, unresolved conflicts, or even the negativity of the environment slowly filter into them. Over time, this emotional accumulation generates exhaustion. They do not always know how to differentiate where others' emotions end and where their own begin. For this reason, many highly intelligent people prefer solitude or quiet spaces. Not because they hate people, but because they need to protect their emotional balance. Being constantly surrounded by social stimuli can be overwhelming, even painful for them. In personal relationships, this sensitivity also becomes a challenge. They worry too much about hurting others, analyze every word before saying it, and carry guilt that does not belong to them. When a relationship breaks, they do not forget it easily. They relive the experience, look for explanations, and wonder what they could have done different. From the outside, they may seem distant or reserved. From the inside, they are deeply connected with everything occurring around them. Their silence is not emptiness, but a form of emotional containment. The sensitivity that no one sees does not weaken them. But living with it in a noisy and fast-paced world requires a strength that few recognize. Over time, thinking and feeling with such intensity leaves traces. To protect themselves, Many of these people develop an emotional distance that is not always understood by others. It is not about coldness or lack of interest. It is, above all, a survival strategy. After experiencing disappointments, misunderstandings, or unbalanced relationships, they learn to set invisible boundaries. They observe before trusting. They listen more than they speak. They prefer to measure the emotional terrain before giving themselves completely. This caution is born from experience, not from irrational fear. Emotional distance allows them to analyze situations with greater clarity. It gives them space to reflect, to not react impulsively, and to protect their internal stability. However, this same mechanism can generate a sense of isolation. The more they protect themselves, the harder it becomes to allow others to get close. In social relationships, this attitude is often interpreted as disinterest or arrogance. Some people believe they don't need anyone, when in reality they desire authentic, deep, and honest connections. The superficial is insufficient for them. Empty conversations tire them. Relationships without meaning provide nothing to them. That is why they carefully choose who they allow into their world. They do not seek quantity, but quality. A single sincere relationship can be worth more than many interactions without depth. But this selection requires time, patience, and mutual understanding. Emotional distance also affects how they face conflict. They avoid unnecessary confrontations, not out of weakness, but because they understand the emotional cost they imply. They prefer silence to pointless arguments. They prefer to withdraw rather than lose their internal balance. From the outside, it may seem like they live behind a wall. From the inside, that wall is a protective barrier, built with experience, introspection, and self-knowledge. It does not prevent human contact, but it does filter who truly deserves to cross it. With the passage of time, many of these people begin to understand that solitude is not always a punishment. In reality, it becomes a conscious choice. They do not isolate themselves because they cannot relate, but because they have learned that not all company brings peace. Solitude offers them something that the outside world rarely grants: mental silence. In that space, thoughts are organized, emotions are calmed, and the mind recovers clarity. It is a territory where one does not have to pretend, explain, or justify who they are. There they can be authentic without fear of being misinterpreted. Away from social pressure, they reflect on their past experiences. They analyze relationships, decisions, and mistakes with honesty, not to punish themselves, but to understand themselves better. This process of introspection allows them to grow, redefine boundaries, and recognize what kind of bonds they truly want in their life. However, this choice is often misunderstood. From the outside, solitude is perceived as sadness, failure, or social inability. Few understand that, for some people, being alone is the healthiest way to stay balanced. It is not an escape, it is preservation. In this state, they learn to enjoy their own company. They discover deep interests, develop creativity, and strengthen their identity. Solitude becomes a fertile space where ideas, projects, and a more honest connection with themselves emerge. Even so, they do not give up on human connection. They simply stop forcing it. They no longer seek to fill voids with the wrong presences. They prefer to wait, even for long periods, rather than accept relationships that do not respect their emotional depth. This chosen solitude does not eliminate the desire for connection, but transforms it. When they finally allow someone to get close, they do so from fullness, not from need. And that difference completely changes the way bonds are built. As the years go by, these people realize that their greatest conflict is not with others, but with the lack of meaning they perceive in many areas of modern life. They find it difficult to adapt to a world that prioritizes appearance over depth, speed over reflection, and quantity over quality. They are not satisfied with simple answers. They need to understand the why of things, the purpose behind actions, and the real meaning of decisions. This constant need for meaning leads them to question social norms, imposed expectations, and paths that others follow without hesitation. At work, they may feel disconnected if tasks lack purpose. Fulfilling just to fulfill does not satisfy them. They seek consistency between what they do and what they believe. When they do not find it, frustration appears. Not out of inability, but out of internal misalignment. In relationships, something similar happens. They are not interested in bonds based only on convenience or routine. They need real conversations, emotional exchange, and mutual growth. When a relationship stalls in the superficial, they feel a void that is hard to ignore. This search for meaning also influences how they make important decisions. Before choosing a path, they analyze its long-term consequences, not just the immediate benefits. They prefer to move slowly if that guarantees consistency with their internal values. However, living like this has a cost. Questioning too much can generate a sense of displacement. Sometimes they feel like they don't quite fit in anywhere. They watch as others move forward with confidence while they stop to reflect. But over time, they understand that this pause is necessary. Searching for meaning is not an obstacle, but a compass. Although the path is lonelier and more complex, it allows them to build a more authentic life. They do not chase what shines, but what remains. And that choice, though silent, profoundly defines who they are. A moment comes when these people stop asking themselves why they are different, and start accepting that this difference is an essential part of their identity. They no longer try to fit in at all costs or adapt to expectations that do not reflect who they really are. They understand that forcing themselves to be like everyone else only generates a silent wear and tear. Accepting the difference does not happen overnight. It is the result of years of observation, of feeling out of place, of trying to understand why certain social dynamics are foreign to them. Over time, they discover that they are not defective. They simply function with another rhythm, another depth, and another sensitivity. This acceptance transforms their relationship with the world. They stop constantly comparing themselves. They no longer measure their value by external standards nor seek validation in every interaction. They begin to build more stable self-esteem, based on self-knowledge and internal consistency. Being different also implies learning to live with misunderstanding. Not everyone will understand their silences, their need for space, or their way of processing reality. Before, this generated frustration. Now, it becomes an assumed reality. They do not need to be understood by everyone, only respected. At this point, the difference stops being a burden and becomes a strength. It allows them to observe the world from unusual perspectives, contribute deep ideas, and establish more conscious relationships. They do not seek to stand out, but their authenticity makes them inevitable. Accepting who they are does not eliminate the challenges. They continue to feel, think, and question with intensity. The difference is that they no longer fight against it. They learn to live with their complexity instead of trying to simplify it to please others. When the difference becomes identity, a more serene way of being in the world is born. They do not need to prove anything. They do not need to run. They advance at their own pace, knowing that the depth that defines them is also their greatest value. In the end, these people understand that their path does not consist of choosing between the world and themselves, but in learning to move between both without losing themselves. They do not renounce society, but they do not sacrifice themselves to fit into it either. They seek a fragile balance, built with awareness and patience. They learn to relate from a more honest place. They no longer strive to please everyone or to sustain bonds that do not respect their emotional depth. They allow themselves to say no, to withdraw when necessary, and to protect their internal space without guilt. They understand that taking care of themselves is not selfishness, but personal responsibility. This balance also redefines their concept of success. They stop measuring it in external terms like recognition, status, or approval. Real achievement becomes internal, maintaining consistency between what they think, feel, and do. Living in peace with their complexity becomes a more valuable goal than any external validation. Over time, they discover that their way of being in the world has a silent impact. They do not need to impose themselves to influence. Their calm, their depth, and their ability to listen generate spaces where others also feel safe to be authentic. Without seeking it, they become references for emotional stability. Solitude no longer weighs as it did before. Now it is an ally that accompanies, not a void that hurts. The connections they maintain, though few, are real and significant. Each bond chosen with awareness reinforces the certainty that they do not need a crowd to feel complete. Looking back, they understand that each stage had a purpose. Overanalysis, sensitivity, emotional distance, and solitude were necessary steps to reach this point of acceptance. Nothing was a mistake. Everything was part of the process. The real question is no longer why they are different. The real question is, how many people dare to live with this inner honesty in a world that rarely stops to listen?